I don't know if you guys remember this or know this at all or not, but today is not actually the only holiday happening this week. Anybody know what tomorrow is? Or thinking about it with any expectation or anything like that? April Fools, there it is. Somebody mentioned in the first hour, they said March Madness. You're like, that's not a national holiday or anything like that yet. Maybe it should be. I don't know if anybody's bracket hangs in there at all or not. But yeah, tomorrow is April Fool's Day. I don't know if you guys are like me at all or not, but I love that day. It's a big one in the Armstrong household. And a friend of mine, not to kind of say that that's on any par of what we're doing today. We're going to get to that in just a second and stuff. But a little while ago, a buddy of mine posted, if you're looking for any last-minute ideas or anything like that, posted a great one that he actually pulled a prank on his family and his kids and everything at Easter, and it was pretty incredible. But he called it the Chocolate Bunny Surprise. Kind of like, yeah, you think you're getting a chocolate bunny, but surprise, there's more to it than that. And so basically what he does is he takes this chocolate hollow bunny, still wrapped in the foil and all the things that you give the kids on Easter and all the things like that, and he inserts a small little hole at the bottom of it and fills the entire thing with spicy mustard. And it was absolutely incredible, the responses of the kids and everything like that. So I don't know if you're needing any last-minute surprises or ideas or anything for tomorrow. This runs deep in the Armstrong home. I blame my mother for this. It started a long time ago. She had a very similar one back in the day, except instead of hollow chocolate bunnies, she was making candy apples, and instead of an apple, she substituted an onion, and then gave it to my brother and sister, and I just had a blast with that. And so if you're looking for new ideas or anything like that, you are welcome. You are well prepared for tomorrow and everything that's still to come. I found myself thinking about that a lot this past week in light of Easter being today and April Fool's being tomorrow, when it occurred to me that that's how a lot of the world thinks about everything that we're celebrating today. Kind of like when we talk about the resurrection and Christ walking out of the tomb alive, like it's a great story to tell, but the problem is it's not actually real. It's kind of like a fake bunny, and you think you're getting one thing, and it's something completely different. John Dominic Crossan, who's a former Catholic priest and a modern-day cynic and skeptic, used to say to his own church congregation way back in the day, he used to say, of course the resurrection never literally happened. Like, people don't just walk out of the tomb alive. In other words, like, of course, this isn't a literal, historical, physical resurrection, physical, historical event or anything like that. Yet he would say, I get why we still want to celebrate it today, because there's a very real sense in which every single one of us wants some sort of a spiritual, emotional resurrection to be true in their life. In other words, to him, he's sitting there going, the facts of the resurrection, the historicity of the resurrection, the literal walking out of the tomb, none of that stuff even matters, because there's still good things to be taken from messages around being resurrected and having newness of life. Stephen Hawking once called it a fairy tale for people who are afraid of the dark. And this is kind of what it is. It's just a fairy tale. It's a thing that we say and we speak about and we throw it out there in order to encourage people that are afraid about the future still to come and things of that nature. A few years back, as recently as 2021, 3 years ago, 2021, nearly 67% of nearly 3,000 people polled all around the United States acknowledged that they did believe in a literal resurrection. However, when they narrowed that scope down to people, young adults under the age of 35, nearly 60% of that gathering of people said that they could not believe in a literal resurrection. Church, something is happening to the point where there is something going on where you're sitting there kind of going, okay, I've heard the story. I know what we're doing with Easter, yet I still can't get past this idea that all we're talking about is bunnies and eggs and springtime and pastels and family and good things like that, that it's not something that literally and physically took place nearly 2,000 plus years ago. And meanwhile, we have the historical biblical account right here where the scriptures are going to say of itself that this is a matter of first importance. In fact, Paul's going to come and say in 1 Corinthians 15, he's going to say that if Christ hasn't actually been raised from the dead, he says then our preaching is in vain and our faith is completely useless. In other words, everything we do is completely dependent upon today. In other words, like, what in the world are we doing if Christ hasn't been raised from the dead? That Christ literally and physically condescended from heaven, took on flesh, lived this sinless life that we sing about, preach about still to this day, willingly went to the cross where he literally and physically suffered, bled, and died, and then 3 days later, literally and physically walked out of that tomb alive. And what Paul's saying is, what in the world are we even doing if none of this took place? What are we singing about if Christ didn't conquer sin and death? What are we gathering for week after week, going into the community, living for, giving ourselves to? Why would we be filled with joy if he's simply just like one of us? And so Paul's sitting there kind of going, yeah, everything we do is in vain if none of this is true. But he continues to say, of course, but if it is true, and Christ really did conquer sin and death, and he walked out of that tomb alive, then it absolutely changes everything. Because it means he was telling the truth about who he says that he was, that he really is the Christ, the Son of the living God, the one who spoke everything into existence, the one the prophets were speaking about, the ones that people for generations ago were longing for, the one who came to us in the middle of this place, the one who came and conquered sin and death once and for all. And if he really did conquer sin and death once and for all, then it means that you and I really can live. And I love the way that Tim Keller talks about this. He says that it absolutely changes everything. But the way that he says it, he says, Easter makes Christianity the most irritating religion on the face of the earth. And I love that statement right there because it absolutely does. He says, Easter makes Christianity the most irritating religion on the face of the earth. Because if Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it means you have to accept everything that he said. Because the issue with Jesus isn't whether or not you like some of his teaching. It's not about whether or not we agree with some of the principles or some of his morality, or we think he was a really great guy or a great moral teacher or an enlightened human being or anything like that. He says the issue is if Jesus actually is who he says that he is. And that's directly tied to whether or not he literally and physically rose from the dead. And so what do we do in disbelief? What do we do when this is the thing that's called into question, and the thing that you're sitting there kind of going, that seems a little bit too good to be true? It's where God is going to meet us in the text here this morning. I want to pick it up in Luke chapter 24 today, and you can turn in your Bibles. If you brought it today, you want to follow along. Luke 24, I will be reading from the NIV this week instead of like what we talked about a couple weeks back. But if you didn't bring it, I'll be putting it up on the screen, and you can follow along pretty easily there. But I love Luke's account because if you're not familiar with Luke, he was a medical doctor. If anyone knows anything about dead bodies and life and death and things of that nature, this is going to be Dr. Luke. And so he picks it up in chapter 24 with a group of very faithful women who had been with Jesus, faithfully following him from the very beginning of his ministry. They were there at the foot of the cross. They're the first ones that are there at the empty tomb. They've been with him from the very beginning, and this is where he picks it up in verse 1. He says, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and they went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He is not here, for he is risen. Remember what he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and then on the third day be raised again." And then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. If you need to kick the dude next to you or anything, ladies, feel free. This is the time to do that and be like, yeah, I know what that's like. You didn't believe me. I was telling the truth the whole time, right? They find themselves at this place where what the ladies are telling them this morning, it just seems like nonsense. And they're sitting there kind of going, that's fanciful. I would love to believe that, but I've never seen this before. People don't just walk out of tombs alive. Typically, it's just Thomas who gets the bad rap here, the one who's known as Doubting Thomas, the one who says, yeah, that sounds fantastic. I'm not actually going to believe until I see the piercings in his hands and I'm able to place my hand in his side. Until that day, I'm not able to believe. It seems like what Luke is saying is that it wasn't just Thomas. In fact, Matthew's going to say that when the others finally did get to see the resurrected Christ, this is shortly after this scene that I'm reading right here in Luke 24. Matthew says, as soon as the others did get to see the resurrected Christ, he says that some immediately worshiped him, but other people still doubted. In other words, it's not just Thomas who had a hard time believing. It's not just Thomas who said, you know what, I've got a few questions that I still need to have answered in order for me to go and to believe. And the truth is, this is how faith often works. For some of us, faith is something that comes pretty easily. You're sitting there kind of going, yeah, I didn't get that gene. Like they came out of the womb and first words out of their mouth were like, Jesus is Lord or something. And like faith seems to come really, really easy. They believe God for the impossible all the time. And then others, it's a little bit more difficult. And you sit there and you're like going, okay, I'm seeing the resurrection, I'm seeing the miracles, and I'm seeing the life, and I'm seeing all these different kinds of things, but I'm still going to need a few more signs. For some of us, you look at these things, and there's some things that are a little bit easier to believe, and there's other things you're looking at, sitting there kind of going, yeah, I've still got a lot of questions around this thing. I remember reading a blog a little while ago called Why I Don't Believe in God. And it was fascinating because it was people writing in and expressing a lot of the same questions that get circulated and we kind of all have at different times in our relationship with God as we're kind of asking the same questions. But one of the guys wrote in, and I loved what he had to say. I thought it was fascinating. He said, basically, I feel that religion outgrew its usefulness when science became as accurate as it is today. And so do many other people my age. Personally, I'll never believe anything that I can't see, and I'll never have true faith in anything. I think it's interesting how similar this is to a lot of the stuff that Thomas expressed there in the narrative. Like, I can't actually believe until I see it with my own eyes. I'm not going to believe until I'm able to put my fingers there in his side. Other people were writing in and they were expressing concerns and questions around the problem of pain and how in the world an all-powerful, all-good, all-loving God could allow so much evil and sin and difficulty to persist in the world today. Other people looked at the church and they're sitting there kind of going, yeah, there's a lot of hypocrites in the church and it's really, really broken. And truth of the matter is I really just don't want to be a part of them. And you're looking at this going, okay, I don't know how to reconcile what I'm seeing from some believers over here in line with what Christ has said over here. Point of the matter, church, is that doubt is not something that's unique to the disciples. This disbelief in this place that we find them here in the middle of the story, it's not something that originated 2,000 years ago. It's not something that ended with them. It's something that continues to exist here today as we come to these stories and these narratives with questions in our minds sitting there kind of going, okay, what do I do with this doubt or disbelief? And that is the question that we've got to answer here today. How do we deal with it? How do we deal with it? What do we do with the questions that we have? And to that end, I love what we see from Peter here in this text. Because in verse 12, it says that immediately Peter gets up and he runs to the tomb, which is exactly what we've got to do. He gets up there, and in other words, he's sitting there kind of going, okay, I'm not okay with these unexamined doubts. I'm sitting there in disbelief. I don't fully understand what's taking place. I don't know why these ladies are coming and telling us this story over here, but he's not okay with these unexamined doubts. And so he gets up and he runs and he says, I want to be an eyewitness of what actually took place. I want to go to the original source. I want to go and I want to find out exactly what took place. I'm not okay with these unexamined doubts. In other words, like he's not okay with these endless questions. And it's just continuing to exist in question after question after question after question, when the reality is that there are answers to some of these questions. He's not okay with this endless deconstruction and tearing down the things that he believes without going to the original source and reconstructing and building up and figuring out what it is that's actually true. And so it says that immediately Peter gets up, he begins to doubt his doubts. He begins to come into question and to examine some of the disbelief that he was going through and experiencing in his own mind. It says that he gets up and he runs to the tomb. He gets to the tomb, and it says that bending over, he saw the strips of linen that were lying by themselves. And he walked away wondering, what in the world just happened to this place? In other words, you come into this tomb, and he's sitting there going, that's the linen. Those are the things that Jesus' body was wrapped in, and it's sitting there neatly folded in the middle of this tomb. Like, what in the world just happened in this place? How do I reconcile the things that I'm seeing over here with the things that are normative for me to believe over here? What do I do with my doubts? What do I do with my disbelief? The ladies in verse 4, they were also perplexed. They didn't come and immediately have faith, even though they were there at the cross. They were more faithful, it seems, all throughout the story. But they come and it says that they're perplexed. No one knows exactly what's going on. I love the way that God comes and deals with their disbelief through the angel there in verse 6. Because you're going to see the angel come in verse 6, and he's basically going to say, don't you remember Jesus' words? In other words, in the middle of their disbelief and doubting, they're saying, hey, don't forget what Jesus said to you back before the cross. Don't forget what Jesus said to you. He says literally, don't you remember what he told you when you were in Galilee? that the Son of Man had to be delivered into the hands of sinners, crucified, and raised again on the third day. They're sitting there going, yeah, I thought he was kidding about that. Like, I didn't know exactly what that meant. He's like, no. Don't you remember that he actually called this? That he predicted the entire thing? That he helped you plan for this day? Like, don't you forget Jesus' words. In the middle of your disbelief, in the middle of your questions, go back to the original source and pay attention to the things that Jesus actually said. In other words, don't forget Matthew chapter 12. And maybe you go back to that scene and you remember during Jesus' life, the chief priests, the religious leaders, they're all coming to Jesus and they're sitting going, yeah, Jesus, we're going to need a sign from you that you really are the Messiah. You know what? You're like turning water into wine. That wasn't great enough. You know, feeding 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and a couple of fish. We're going to need a little bit more than that. You're touching everybody, and the blind are able to see, and the lame are able to walk, and the deaf are able to hear. Yeah, we're just going to need a little bit more than that. You're teaching with authority, and it's kind of to the amazement of all the chief priests and the religious leaders. But you know what? We still have a few questions over here. And they come to him and they're like, hey, can you give us a sign? And do you remember that Jesus comes and mocks them a little bit? He's like, how weak in your faith that you need a sign. Nevertheless, I'll give you a sign. And so he says, here it is. In the same way that Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and for 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the center of the earth for 3 days and for 3 nights. In other words, you needed a sign that I really am the Messiah, the one that you've longed for, the one that I said that I am. He says, pay attention to what takes place after the crucifixion. Although they don't know it in that moment, but he's saying, look, I recognize the miracles aren't enough for you. The teaching isn't enough for you. The sinless life, it's not enough for you. And so great, we're going to go beyond that. Pay attention to what takes place after the crucifixion. John chapter 2, the exact same scene. They come to Jesus, and different people, different time, they're coming to him and they're saying, yeah, Jesus, we need a little bit more. Help us believe. We want to know that it's really you. And he says basically the same thing, very similar thing. He says, you want to know a sign? Destroy this temple, speaking of his physical body, is what it says in the text. And he says, in 3 days, I'm going to raise it up again. In other words, don't pay attention to that, just pay attention to what's about to take place. And when you see what's about to take place, you're going to know, again, all of those miracles, all of those things, all of my teachings, all of my authority, all of my innocence, all throughout my life, all of it is culminating in the resurrection that's still to come. And so pay attention to those days. And so here's the angel coming to these ladies, and in their disbelief, in their wonder, in their perplexed state of being, he comes to them and he says, hey, don't forget Jesus' words. And as the story progresses, Jesus is going to come along, resurrected Jesus, and he's going to say, yeah. Also, that's true, but pay attention to the prophet's words. And you see this incredible scene where he begins walking with a couple guys on the road to Emmaus. And it's kind of a funny scene because it's, again, immediately right after the resurrection. We're continuing here in the text. It's immediately right after the resurrection. People are not expecting to see resurrected Jesus. Keep in mind, this is pre-social media, Facebook, Instagram. There's not pictures of Jesus everywhere, right? You don't have his picture on like every door frame of the home or whatever. That one has not been printed yet. I guess he didn't pose for that picture yet. And so these things weren't out there. And so he's resurrected Jesus. He begins walking with 2 guys on the road to Emmaus. And he goes and he asks them a question. He's like, hey, guys, why are you so sad? You remember that question? Why are you guys so sad? Why are you so blue? And remember their response in verse 19. He's like, they look at him and they're like, do you seriously not know what's been taking place? Do you not know why we're sad? Do you not know why everyone in the town is so quiet and gloom and why everybody's in despair? He says in verse 19, it is Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. However, he was crucified. And we all thought that he was the Messiah who would one day come and redeem Israel. And Jesus comes back from this response in verse 25. And he says, how foolish you are and slow to believe what the prophets have said. Didn't they tell you how the Messiah would have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? And so he says, beginning with the Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. And so the angel's pointing to Jesus' words. Jesus is pointing these men to the prophet's words, and he's opening it up and he's going, hey, don't you see that I'm the one that they were speaking about? Don't you see that that I'm the better Moses, and I'm the better David, the one that everyone was longing for, that better king who would never leave you nor forsake you, the one who would always be faithful to you from here on out. I'm that better king that you are longing for. And you can imagine him kind of opening up. I don't know if he's probably not opening up any text or anything at that point in time, but you can imagine him going through so many of the different prophecies that were all speaking about the Messiah. All in all, there's over 300 specific ones that we have recorded for us all throughout the Old Testament. And we're talking about like not generic things like the Messiah is going to be a really nice guy. He's going to have flowing locks of hair or something like that. That's not what he's talking about. Specific, unique things, kind of like in Genesis 15, where it talks about how the Messiah is going to come from the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, continuing into the Psalms and Samuel, where he talks about it. It's going to continue in the line of King David and go on out. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, when it talks about how the Messiah is going to be born of a virgin. And he's sitting there kind of going, hey guys, that doesn't happen very often. I don't know if we know that, but like the Messiah, how do you know that it's him? He's going to be born of a virgin. And his name is going to be called Emmanuel, God with us, which we continue to call him to this day. Micah 5:2, guess what? That Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. You want to know if it's him? I'm telling you where he's going to be born. Jeremiah 31, there's going to be a massacre of children historically in the community around there. It's going to shake people for generations, but Jeremiah says there's going to be a massacre of children around the time, at that time when the Messiah is going to be born. Isaiah 53, he's going to be crucified with criminals. You want to know that it's a Messiah? He's going to be crucified. He's going to be killed with criminals. He's going to be rejected by his own people. Psalm 69, Isaiah 53. Zechariah 11 says that the money used to betray this Messiah, guess what? There's going to be a betrayal involved. And the money that's used to betray that Messiah is going to be used to buy a potter's field. Like you can imagine the joy of Jesus coming and having this conversation with these dudes on the road to Emmaus, and he's sitting there going like, let me show you, how did you not know what's taken place? Don't you see, I am the one that the prophets were speaking about. I wish you could see exactly what he's pointing to, but in Matthew 1, Matthew's going to lay this out for us, and he's going to take the genealogy of Jesus all the way back through King David, all the way back to Abraham there in chapter 1, setting this up and kind of saying, yeah, he is the king that all of us have been longing for. He is the King of Kings that we've all been waiting for, the promised one that the prophets had been telling us about. In chapter 1, verse 21, it says that he was born of a Virgin Mary. He was literally called Emmanuel. We are still calling him Emmanuel, God with us to this day. In chapter 2, we find out Jesus was literally and physically born in Bethlehem. Chapter 2, verse 16, King Herod, again, not anything that Jesus could control, not anything that the disciples could control, not anything that anyone would ever be able to manipulate, says that King Herod ordered a massacre of innocent children everywhere because he had heard about Jesus' birth and he got jealous. In other words, he's sitting there going, King of the Jews, we're going to kill all the little babies that are being born. Kind of very similar to Moses' story way back in the day. But something outside of their control, we're reading about that's actually literally, physically, historically took place back in the day. Matthew 27, Jesus was literally, physically crucified with criminals. John chapter 1, he was rejected by his own people. Matthew 27, the money used to betray Jesus was literally used to purchase a potter's field. And the point that he's making is that these things don't just happen. And he's sitting there, he's walking with these two guys on the road to Emmaus, and he's going, don't you see that this is what's been prophesied about? That this is the thing that I've been preparing you for this day. Don't you see what's taken place? I am the one who's come in fulfillment of all of these different prophecies. Church scholars say that the odds of a person fulfilling even 8 of the 300 prophecies are 1 in 10 to the 17th power. In other words, it's not happening. It's like, we're like, so you're telling me there's a chance? He's like, no, there's no chance. Like that movie was called Dumb and Dumber for a reason, right? He's going like, there's no chance that that's happening. This is not a coincidence and it's not an accident. Yet they're at this place where they can't see it. And they're wrestling with disbelief, and quite honestly, this is not a judgment upon them. We would be in the exact same place in the middle of their shoes, wrestling with what in the world do I do with this historic event in the middle of this moment. And so here is Peter in the middle of disbelief, in the middle of all of his questions, in the middle of probably a whole lot of doubts. What does this mean for me personally? All these different kinds of things. But here's Peter in the middle of it all, in the middle of all of this sounds like nonsense, and he is racing to the tomb, which is exactly where you and I need need to do every single time we're dealing with doubt or disbelief. We have to race to the tomb because the tomb is the place where our doubts will go to die. Every single time. Because Peter shows up at that tomb and guess what he finds? Nothing. And he shows up and he's like, there was a tomb here, or I'm sorry, there was a body here 3 days prior, and now there's no body here. And he's sitting there kind of going, he walks into this thing, like the Roman guards are gone at that time because they're terrified of what's taken place. And he walks in, he finds no body, but he does find Jesus' linens. You know, the ones that they used to wrap up his dead body, covered in blood and crust. And Peter walks into this tomb, and he's sitting there going, well, there's his linens, and they're all neatly folded in the middle of this tomb. And he's sitting there asking the question that we've all got to answer today. Like, what do we do with the empty tomb? Like, what do we do when the evidence that I'm looking at right here, staring at face to face, contradicts what seems to be reasonable for me to believe? Like, what do we do when I'm sitting there kind of going, like, yeah, I've never seen anyone walk out of a tomb alive, yet here we are. There's a tomb that's empty, and I know I had nothing to do with it. I mean, church, all they had to do, all the Romans had to do was produce a body, and this entire thing would be done with. Yet the most powerful and motivated government in the world was not able to do it. The best that they were able to come up with, these Roman guards come back, they concoct a story, they come up and they're like, well, okay, maybe we could just tell everybody, or maybe the thing that we're going to tell everybody is, you know what, we fell asleep for a little while, and while we were asleep, these disciples came and they stole the body. And this is a story that continues to persist. It's like, well, I guess we nodded off a little bit, and these disciples came, the ones who were terrified and afraid, the ones who are cowardly by nature, the ones who are trying to save their own life 3 days prior at the crucifixion of Jesus. You know, those disciples were terrified and afraid, and somehow they came in and overthrew these Roman guards, or they nodded off, and somehow quietly they were able to sneak in there and steal this body. Church, how in the world would that possibly happen? These two trained Roman guards, full armor, spears, guarding the edge of this tomb, sitting there making sure no one comes and takes off with the body. And all of a sudden, these disciples come, and they're able to, while they're taking a little snooze or something like that, roll away a massive giant stone without them waking up when they're sleeping right next to this giant stone. They're able to roll it out of the way, and not only that, they go in there, and they take the body, but they don't just take the body. They sit there, and they're like, ooh, this is a little bit icky. We're going to unwrap the body. And not only that, but we're going to like fold these linens and we're going to leave it in the middle of the tomb. Church, like I always joke about this all the time, but like when have you seen a man like fold anything? That's never happened. This would be a first. This would be a first. That is the greatest miracle of this entire thing. Like no man has ever folded anything yet. Here they are. They're like, yeah, we got to do it like this and do like. And Jews are coming in and doing this. And they're sitting there, they're going, I believe this. They're coming in and they're sitting there. Okay, we would rather deal with and hold this filleted and bloodied corpse rather than carrying it off wrapped in the linens and everything. And we're going to take the time and we're going to take some time in there. We're not afraid of these Roman guards who are trained killers. Like that's what they do. Their spiritual gift is killing people. That's what they do. And they're waiting for them right outside the tomb. And if they woke up, they would come in and clearly like they would stab them to death. And they're not afraid of that. They're taking their time. They're unwrapping the body. They come and they carry it all off. And then and guess what? There's no body that's ever to be found. Church, how in the world would any of that happen? And why would any of it happen? I mean, some people look at it and they kind of say, okay, well, maybe the apostles, the disciples were trying to gain fame. They're trying to gain power. They're trying to create this own religion that they would be the top of this pyramid scheme and everyone's going to fear them. They got all power over other people. This is what cult leaders do, right? And maybe this is the motivation that's behind it. They're coming in, they've got this scheme and they're coming in and maybe they're coming in and they're just kind of making the entire thing up. It's about power. It's about money. And of course, the problem is they never gained any of it. It was the worst scheme ever executed if that was the goal of the entire thing. In fact, Paul's going to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, he's going to say, God's actually called us apostles to be the lowest of the low, to be the least among all people, to have the least amount of power, to be the most despised culturally speaking. Why? So that we can demonstrate that our hope is not in this life, but it's in the resurrection that's still to come. And it's how it played out. They had no money. They had no power. Their stories weren't even in circulation for a few hundred years after their own death, which, by the way, every single one of them would give their lives for the gospel which proclaims that Jesus is actually alive. They gained nothing. They gave up absolutely everything. Peter was crucified upside down for preaching about the resurrection. And 1 week prior to that, he had to watch his own wife be crucified as well. Church, at what point do you sit there and jump in and be like, hey, y'all, April Fools, I was kidding. We were kidding. He's not really alive. Don't take my wife. Don't let this happen. Like, at what point do you jump in and you say, you know what? Like, we were kidding. Here's the body. No body ever to be found. Andrew was crucified in modern day Soviet Union. John was boiled alive in oil. Like, at what point do you be like, yeah, that's a little bit warm? Hey, y'all, kidding. I'm kidding. We made the whole thing up. Doubting Thomas was martyred after years of evangelism and church planting among militant Hindu groups in India. And granted, like, there's a lot of us that kind of sit there and be like, you know what? There's a lot of martyrs in the world today. That doesn't mean anything. Yet the difference is there's not a lot of people that are willing to die for something that they know is a lie. And this is the difference of the resurrection story, that all of the apostles, all the disciples were eyewitnesses to the actual truth. They lived with Jesus. They were there at the foot of the cross. They were witnesses to the cross, and they were witnesses of the resurrection. In other words, they're not hanging on to grandma or grandpa's stories that have been passed down to them. They're not trying to fit into some religious context which has been hurled upon them. In fact, it dramatically changes the religious context that they were already comfortable in. It completely shakes up everything. They're eyewitnesses to the truth. In other words, they're sitting there kind of going, you know what? These aren't just stories that are made up. Like, I know what actually took place. It's what Chuck Colson was talking about when he said, I know the resurrection is a fact, and that Watergate proved it for me. How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus raised from the dead, and then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Every one of them was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. You're telling me that 12 apostles were able to keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. Church, what do you do with the empty tomb? What do you do when what seems right and what seems reasonable, it contradicts what you're experiencing and seeing in your very own life? Like, what do you do with these things? People come and say, okay, well, maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was a hallucination. And of course, the problem is it wasn't just the disciples and the apostles. It was over 500 other eyewitnesses at the exact same time, all seeing the resurrected Christ, telling the exact same story. And in other words, they're not out there like they picked up some weeds in the garden or something like that. And they're like, hey, Jesus is alive. It's wonderful and all these things. It's 500 different independent eyewitnesses of the resurrected Christ, all telling the exact same story. Church, what do we do with this? Some people come and say, okay, well, maybe Jesus wasn't actually dead. Like, it's the not quite dead yet theory, right? He's not quite dead, you know, and the theory goes, okay, well, maybe he was just kind of beaten to within inches of his life. He's wrapped up and thrown into a tomb. And then guess what? He creeps out, slips past the Roman guards. Meanwhile, like, that's not the story that even the guards were telling or anything like that. Like, what do we do with that? I love the way that J. Vernon McGee, he described this one. He says that there was a lady in his church that wrote him a letter and said, Dr. McGee, my pastor said that on Easter, Jesus was almost dead on the cross and that the disciples nursed him back to health. What do you think about that? To which McGee replied, dear sister, please beat your preacher with a leather whip for 39 heavy strokes. Nail him to a cross, hang him in the sun for 6 hours, run a spear through his heart, embalm him, wrap him in linens, put him in an airless tomb for 3 days, and then you tell me what happens. Church, something happened that day. Something happened that day. Because on Friday, he was crucified, dead, and buried. And then they wake up on Sunday, and the tomb is empty. The body's been missing. His clothes are neatly folded in the middle of the whole thing, which is the most wild thing in my mind. But the clothes are neatly folded in the middle of the tomb. He's appearing to more than 500 eyewitnesses all around the land at the exact same time. He's out there eating. He's out there teaching. The disciples go from doubting to preaching and living to dying. And it's all because this becomes the thing that changes absolutely everything. Church, what else is there to do if you've seen the risen Christ? What else is there to do but give the entirety of your life to the fact that, oh my gosh, I sat there at the cross, I watched him breathe his last, I've seen his sinless, faultless life, I've heard everything that he said, I know the prophecies are true, I've heard his own predictions, I'm seeing it play out in front of my life. Like, what else is there to do if you've seen the risen Christ? Like, you can imagine, like, I wish I could see them go from that transition to that point of grieving, to that point of despair, where they're all hiding and afraid for their own life, to the point that they're looking at Jesus face to face, and they're staring at him, sitting there going, like, what in the world? It's actually you. You are faithful to your word. You really are the Son of the living God. You are the one who spoke and everything came into being. You are the one the prophets talked to us about. You are the one who came from heaven, took on flesh, and lived this sinless life as a substitute for you and for me. And you really did walk out of that tomb alive, to the point that they're sitting there kind of going, oh my gosh, this entire thing is true. Like, you can imagine what that was like in their own minds when it began to connect for them, and they're sitting there kind of going, oh, you really are the Christ, you're the Son of the living God, and this happens to be the sign of Jonah. Like, this is the thing that you told us about. You called your shot. It's not accidental. He's not a victim of anybody's assault or anything like that, that he knew that this was happening, and he prepared his people for the time that it was going to take place. They're sitting there kind of going, this is the sign of Jonah. Your body's the temple that was been resurrected and rebuilt. It's you. You're the one the prophets have been telling us all about. And the time that it all connects, and then sit there and then say, okay, if you're the one that the prophets have been telling us about, then it means that you really have conquered sin and death. And you really do have power over those things. And if you have power over those things, and you came to do this, then it means that my sin and death can be conquered too. Can you imagine the realization in that moment when they're staring him in the face and they're sitting there going, this isn't just a historical event, but that all the things that he said are true are actually true, that his grace and that his mercy actually applies to me. Church, it's the hope of Easter. It's why we sing year after year. But more than just an annual basis, we come back on a regular basis, giving our hearts and the entirety of our lives to our risen King, because it's not just a joke, and it's not just a myth, and it's not just a nice story we tell so that we can spiritually or emotionally have some sort of a resurrection or a great comeback story or anything like that. It is a historical reality that 2,000 plus years ago, God came in the flesh, and he did it for a reason. And he lived and he died as a substitute for you and for me. And then 3 days later, he walked out of that thing alive, proving that he has the power over sin and death. And because he did, and because he is who he says that he is, and he did what he has done, you and I can live too. I love the way Paul talks about it. Romans chapter 4, he says that he was delivered over to death for our sin. In other words, again, none of it was accidental. He wasn't a victim of the Romans or this plotting and scheming or anything like that. He was delivered over to death for our sin. In other words, as a substitute for you and for me. Why? Because the wages of our sin is death and separation from God for all of eternity. And so there was intentionality to his life and to his death and to his resurrection. And here's where Paul goes next, and it's the beauty of the Easter story. He says he was delivered over to death for our sins, but here it is. He was raised to life for our justification, which is a beautiful ancient way of just simply saying that you and I can be declared righteous, is what the word literally means, that you and I can be declared righteous before a holy God. Not because we've been righteous, not because we've figured out the law or morality better than other people, not because we repented in time and figured it out and did church the right way better than other people and things of that nature. No, that you and I could be declared righteous before a holy God, not because we are, but because he is. And he accomplished something for us when he went to that cross and 3 days later conquered sin and conquered death. It's the hope of Easter, that because Jesus lives, that I can live too. Some of us are sitting there kind of going, okay, yeah, that sounds fantastic, Pastor, but I don't think you know what I've been through. I don't think you know some of the things that I've done. Can't tell you how many similar conversations I've had with people, and we come to this place of disbelief, and you're going, that sounds wonderful, I would love to believe that, but the reality is you don't know some of the things that I've done. And the truth of the matter is I have no idea what you've done. But the Easter story is about what God has done in Christ. And because of what God has done for us in Christ, What it means is that sin has actually been defeated. And if sin has actually been defeated, it means that you'll never be able to out-sin God's grace. That no matter how far it's been, no matter how long you go, that his grace is bigger. And that thing that you've been holding on to, sitting there kind of going, hey, this is the thing that defines me. This is the thing that condemns me. This is the thing that keeps me small. This is the thing that makes me hide. He's coming and saying, I came on purpose to do something about your sin, that you would be set free, that you could find life now and for all of eternity. And it's not just a myth or a fanciful story. It is a historical reality that tomb is still empty and no body has ever been found. And we sit there and we're going, yeah, but you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've done. And but like all throughout Scripture, we see people that have been like trying to trump you. And the reality is, like, we see people like David, a murderer and an adulterer, and all these horrible things, this liar, this deceiver at different points of the time. And we see God come and redeem him by his grace and make him into somebody brand new. And we see like Mary Magdalene there first at the grave, possessed by 7 different demons. In other words, she's got a story that's full of baggage. She knows what difficulty's like. What difficulty's like before coming to Christ, and Christ redeems her and sets her free. And she becomes one of the most faithful followers of Christ from there on out. An apostle to the apostles is their title later on, because she's the one that comes and is sent to the disciples to tell them about the beauty of the resurrection story. And like all these people come and they keep saying to themselves, like, yeah, you don't know what I've done, but we keep seeing these stories, and Christ comes and he redeems them and he sets them free and he forgives them and he showers his grace upon them and makes them brand new. It's the hope of the Easter story, that because Christ lives today, our sin is forgiven, you have been cleansed, you have been redeemed, and you can be set free to the praise and glory of his name. And so here they are in the middle of disbelief. This sounds a little bit too good to be true, right? How in the world can he be alive? Thanks, ladies. I don't know that I fully believe you yet. And I love the invitation of Jesus, because I think it's the invitation for us today. In verse 36, it says, while the 2 men from Emmaus, they recognize who Jesus is, they're coming back and they're telling the other disciples about this meeting with Jesus. It says that Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. The first appearance of Jesus, resurrected Christ, to the disciples. And he comes to this room, probably sneaks up on them again. It says, peace be with you. It says at verse 37, they were startled and frightened, thinking that they saw a ghost. He said to them, why are you guys troubled, and why do doubts rise in your minds? And here's the invitation. He just says, look at my hands and look at my feet. It's me. It's me. Touch me and see. Because a ghost doesn't have real flesh and bones, as you will see that I have. And when he said this, he just showed them his hands and his feet. And while they couldn't believe it still, because of the joy and the amazement of the situation, he asked them, you guys have anything to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and he ate in their presence. You guys know why Luke makes mention of the fish? It's simply because it happened. It's not a made-up story to make apostles look great. It's not a myth, or like, there's no other reason that it's here except that, guess what? That's what happened. And he wasn't just a ghost. It wasn't just an hallucination. It wasn't just a dream. It was God in the flesh who came down on purpose so that our sins could be cleansed and wiped away. And he went to that cross, and he suffered, and he bled, and he died, and he walked out of that tomb alive. And guess what? He was hungry. For some reason, he liked boiled fish. Almost every year, I like to remind our church of something that just meant a lot to me when I was in the teenage years, and I was coming out of childlike faith, is a good way to probably describe it, and figuring out, okay, do I believe what I believe only because my parents passed it on? Like, we've heard that, right? I'm an American, so of course you're a Christian or something like that. And found myself in this season kind of really asking the questions and saying, okay, why do I believe what I believe? Am I really in this thing or not? Is Christ who he says that he is or not? And there was a lot of writing and stuff that was kind of to this end, but this was something that just meant a lot to me. This was actually written by J. Warner Wallace, who happened to be a forensic detective, which is a really cool job, by the way. He was a forensic detective. He was an atheist that set out to examine Other people have done this too, Lee Strobel and things of that nature. But he comes and he's writing about this, and he was trying to set out to say, okay, how do I deny this entire thing? In the middle of all of his research around being a forensic detective, he came and discovered that there's a number of things that scholars of all kinds of faith all agree are true around Jesus. In other words, this is the baseline for what to believe about Jesus. Maybe you came in with disbelief and you're sitting there kind of going, okay, I don't know what to do with this entire thing. But as an atheist and a forensic detective, here's what he says is the baseline to be true. Scholars of all faiths agree in this. That Jesus was a literal, physical, historic man who lived a virtuous life during the time of Tiberius Caesar. People ask, do you believe in Jesus? And they're like, I don't think he really exists. And you're like, yes, he literally, physically existed. Historical evidence, everything around there. He was a physical man. His reputation was that he was at least a great teacher and a miracle worker who accomplished amazing things that people could not explain naturally. In other words, they're looking at his life and they're sitting there going, I don't know what to do with any of these things. And he was at least like that was the reputation around him. He had a brother named James who wasn't a believer in the deity of Jesus until after the resurrection. Church, I love this one. To me, this is one of like that and the folded clothes that kind of it grabs me every single time because like he wasn't an only child. Like Jesus wasn't, he had brothers, he had brothers at least, and James was not a believer that Christ was the Messiah. He's like, yeah. I'm not giving him that kind of a credit as brothers often do. Yet until after the resurrection, he became a fully devoted follower of Christ, proclaiming that Christ was raised from the dead. Church, like what would it take for you to convince your brother or sister that you are the Messiah? I'm just saying that's kind of a big deal. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate on the eve of the Jewish Passover because he claimed that he was the Messiah. In other words, people are like, he never claimed to be the Christ. He was crucified because he claimed to be the Christ. Darkness fell over the earth, and an earthquake occurred roughly at noon when he died. Think that's a coincidence? Darkness fell over the earth historically. Earthquake occurred roughly at noon when he died. The disciples were devastated, depressed, and afraid when he was crucified. In other words, they're not off in a room. They're plotting how to become leaders of a revolution or anything like that. They were not warriors. They were not army people. They couldn't defeat any crowd or anything like that. Jesus was buried in a tomb by an unbelieving Jew named Joseph of Arimathea, who was a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin, which is sort of kind of a Jewish Supreme Court. Meaning this wasn't a conspiracy. He wasn't one of the original disciples, and he's not giving them a tomb that's got a trap door in the back or anything like that. Here's how we're going to pull it off. I, kind of worked it all out. It's on YouTube. It's awesome. 2 Roman guards were there to protect that grave from being robbed. 3 days later, the tomb was empty. No body has ever been found. The disciples did a complete 180 in their demeanor. They claimed that he rose from the dead, every single one of them. Nearly 500 people around the same time gave the testimony to the exact same story immediately after the crucifixion. The common day of worship moved from Saturday to Sunday in recognition of the resurrection, and all of the disciples would spend the rest of their lives spreading that message, and every single one of them would eventually die for that message. Church, it's the strength of the Easter story. We don't just come and just sing about myths and fairy tales and April Fools. It looks like a bunny. It's not really a chocolate bunny and stuff like that. That Christ literally and physically 2,000 years ago took on flesh. And he lived that sinless life we could not live. And he willingly, on purpose, intentionally went to that cross to accomplish something for you and for me that we were not able to do for ourselves. And we thought it was over. We thought that there was only darkness. We thought that there was no hope for the future. But then 3 days later, he walked out of that tomb alive. Not as an example of just, hey, this is a really cool trick, but to accomplish that the forgiveness of sins is actually possible. He conquered sin and death. And the beauty of the Easter story is that because he lives, you and I can live too. If we will come to him in faith and lay down our disbelief and take him up on that invitation where he comes and says, look at my hands, look at my feet, look at my word, look at the prophets, look at the miracles, look at what I told you was going to happen, look at everything that actually happened, and believe. Man, the question that's on the table for us is, what are you going to do with the empty tomb? It's the question for us every single day of our lives. What do we do with the risen Christ? It changed everything. Everything. Because the disciples are sitting there going, if Christ is alive, what else is there to live for? What else do I give my life for? If Christ conquered sin and death, then everything he said is true. And what else do I give my life to today? It's the question that's before us here today. I love the way that Anne Rice, who was an outspoken agnostic, she was the author of a lot of the vampire books that were very, very popular. She was an outspoken agnostic who set out to figure out how in the world Christianity became as big as it did. And she writes about it in her book, Christ the Lord. How did a group of Jewish peasants launch the greatest religious movement in history? It's out there on Amazon. You can get it today. Highly recommend it. Here was her conclusion, and it's my conclusion here today too. She says that Christianity achieved what it did because Christ really did rise from the dead. It was the fact of the resurrection that sent the apostles out into the world with the force necessary to create Christianity. Nothing else could have done it except for that. It's what we stand on today. You're not singing empty songs. You're not hoping in something that has no foundation, no substance. Christ has risen from the dead, and because he has, you and I can live too. May we rejoice in that today. May you who have come in here with disbelief or doubt, may you take him to the foot of the cross and the empty tomb. Would you examine his hands and his feet? Put your hands into his sides, and would you believe? And would you find life in him today? Jesus, we worship you, God. We magnify you. You are the risen King of all kings and the Lord of all lords, the great I am, the one who spoke everything into existence, the one who looked upon us, and somehow, God, you had love for us, and that you demonstrated it in the giving of your son, Jesus, to come and to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. God, we come and we recognize today that when we were lost and dead in our sins, you came and you moved towards us. And church, maybe you did come in here today and you came in with disbelief, questions, doubts. Church isn't your thing. I'm not asking you to come and be a part of the church. Although you see Christ, you will come and you will hunger for him and live for him in ways that you never thought possible. But the beauty of the gospel is that we were lost and dead in our sins. Every single one of us, not just a certain type, every single one of us lost and dead in our sins. And the wages of our sin, according to the word of God, is death and separation from God. But God continued loving us. He never stopped loving us. It's why he sent his son 2,000 plus years ago to take on flesh and to do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. I'm not preaching to you morality today. I'm not preaching law. I'm preaching to you the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. You could not get it right, but God came and he got it right on our behalf. He lived that life. He went to the cross as a substitute for you. And 3 days later, he walked out of that tomb alive, proving his power over sin and death. And he makes you this invitation and says that there is life waiting for you if you will come to me and believe. And it's the invitation today. Would you come to him and simply say yes in genuine, repentant faith? I recognize that you are who you say that you are. You are the King of Kings. It's not a myth. It's not a fairy tale. You really, literally, physically, historically lived and you died and you rose again. And Jesus, I am trusting in you for the forgiveness of my sins and for life today and forevermore. The Word of God says, not on an altar call, not on any kind of an emotional moment, but when you come to him in this genuine faith, you will be given the right to be called sons and daughters of the King. Would you come to him today in genuine faith and say, Jesus, I believe? Church, I just want to give you a few moments to just sit in that moment and to just talk to the Lord in recognition of everything that he's done for us in Christ. Some of us need that reminder simply to rejoice. Some need to say yes for the very first time today. In a few minutes, we'll come together again and we'll sing.